Hello everyone. Yeah, this is today's lecture in the asynchronous format. Yeah, I'm sorry for in advance because of my voice condition and the health condition. I had to do the asynchronous format because I cough a lot and because of my bad voice. I found that it might not be very safe for everyone if I cough too much in front of you. So my voice condition got a little bit better, so I decided to make it in the video format now. So sorry for sorry for your all inconvenience. And as I mentioned in the early semester, usually once per semester I have the asynchronous format because of the unexpected situations. Okay, so hopefully we don't need to do it. Okay, because of many of the extreme conditions. Okay, so let me cover a little bit of the contents we saw last time. Not sure. I didn't cover last time. So the gender role is assigned expected role or expected attitude and expected behaviors assigned to each gender. So, for example, if there was a stereotype or if there were some of the expected behaviors of the males and the females, there are some of the strengths as well, because even though there are many of the expected roles and attitudes, there are some types of the variations they can do or they can conduct in terms of the levels of their roles in together. So the gender identity refers to the person deeply held internal perception of their gender. So usually through the socialization process, they will build their gender identity throughout the socialization process in family or in their educational institution. And transgender people. So transgender people, they decided to change their biological gender or biological sex, and they believe that. So not only the people who had the surgery, but also that some people who perceive that not only based on the physical traits and the sexual or reproductive organs, and they identify the behaviors and the characteristics other than the gender assigned or sex assigned at the birth or based on their physical traits. And the gender dysphoria. So this is a kind of the role strain. So even though gender role or their biological gender is assigned based on the physical characteristic, they would believe that, or they have the strong desire. They want to be another gender or another sex. But they have the stress that if they change their gender or if they change their all kind of the gender identity not assigned at their birth, they would have some kind of many of the strains and the stresses. There might be some source of the gender dysphoria, which is measured as the psychological stress scale in the DSM-5. And there are so many types of the transgender identities. So as I mentioned just before, not only by their physical characteristics, and they can do the physical surgery to add or to remove the physical organs. And sometimes it's very difficult. The surgery is very difficult, and sometimes the social acceptance, even though these are very widely prevalent and relatively, and there are more acceptances, still there are many of the gender stereotypes based on the classical genders. So in some cases, a person might feel identified with another gender, but later they determine that they identify with their assigned gender. So this is not very static but very dynamic. So it means that if they have some of the gender identity based on their biological gender, and they change their gender identity because of the physical attractiveness and the sexual intercourses, but later on there would be some kind of changes. So there might be one kind of the argument that their gender identities are determined based on socialization. But in other sorts of the arguments, they argue that those traits are based on their hormone level, and these are based on the biological or the natural natural instinct. So there are many types of the arguments we cannot align into 2 or 3 simple arguments. So we would feel that this is very confusing sometimes, but we would just know that we would need to know that there are very, very diverse levels of the arguments about the transgender identities. And also the intersex people or intersex individuals. People assigned the gender at birth, and based on the medical procedure, they believe that they need to choose another or some of the gender or some of the sex based on their physical characteristic. So the physical characteristics include the sexual reproductive organs at birth. And the person's hormonal and chromosomal and the physical characteristics are different from the ways the people will develop. It means that their physical characteristics and their sexual organs and the reproductive organs, these are male probably, but for some reason their identity would be female. So then there might be some kind of the discrepancies lead into very high level of stress and strain, and then they would decide to remove or add some of the sexual organ because they want to align their gender identity and their physical characteristics. So usually at birth they recognize that, the OB-GYN doctor and other doctors will believe that they would find those characteristics at birth, but sometimes in lifetime it's impacting on all of the processes, all of the life courses, which is very hard one for everyone. So in sexual organ, they are diverged based on their chromosomal structure. Should be biological female and biological male based on their development process. And the intersex and transgender are very different terminology. So many transgender people have no intersex traits, but many intersex people do not consider themselves as transgender. So sometimes some of the social phenomena and some of the terminologies, they can exchange together. But intersex and transgender, as like the sex and gender, we cannot interchangeably use it as a similar term. So most people born in intersex are very healthy. There are the biological limitations sometimes, but if these are not a matter of the biological disability or something, many of the people born without the sexual organ or without the underdeveloped sexual organ, they are born very healthy. So we don't have the specific reason to see these people or those people are born in some limited or restricted way. And in many cases, there are sometimes because these are the sexual organs are very deeply or closely related with the urinating and other processes. But usually in this point of time, the medical technologies are well supporting or well regulating or well resolving of those types of the issues. So there might be some of the better situation for the intersex people. So these 2 videos, I made very short introduction of those 2 videos. And we will see that, so in both types, so in first video, this female student was assigning the people who are the biological boys, but if they would have the transgender or some of the neutral or homosexualities, believe that, so the biological boys believe they are their gender identities are females, and based on their gender identity, and the biological boys, the who are born as boys are participating in the competition, there might be a big thing for females in terms of if they are competing all together for the limited positions. But as you could see in the cisgender woman here, she was very successful bodybuilder and professional athlete, but based on her gender identity, she decided to have be the intersex and the cisgender people. and then she was banned to all of the competitions. So based on the perspective, based on the ground they are standing, there are many different perspectives. There are many different situations we would imagine. So it's almost impossible. It's always almost impossible to understand each side. But at least we are studying, and we are studying social science, and we are considering many of the different perspectives. We would believe, so I believe that we would need to have very open mind sometimes, because we don't know the each perspective very completely and fully. So at least we would have some respect to each other, because even though some arguments are here sounding very sounding imperfect and sounding not very perfect and altogether, but still there are maybe 1% and 10% correct information, or 50% correct information based on the context. So checking up and then trying to understand why they were in that situation, or understanding why these were a kind of problem for them would be very important to understand their situation. Okay, so that was the thing we learned last time. And I didn't cover last time, and let me go to the next slide about the sex and the gender issues. So now nature and the nurture. So nature and nurture, this is very hard to make the whole division, because the nature, so natural instinct, and these are still important. But many of the gender traits and the gender ideology and the gender aspects and the attitude, these are learned throughout the developing process. So these are some kind of very controversial issue, but we believe that even though there are the biological traits, but we need to agree and we need to understand that there are many of the cultural differences. So based on the culture, like East Asian countries and the European countries and North America and the South America, based on their culture, their mother culture and base culture, there are many different types of the gender role and expectations. So in one hand, the biology says, so more studies based on the pure biology and more inclined to the biology. So many of the development process, I mean the evolution process of the human beings, from prehistory period of time. The men, so the biological male, were developed for hunting and to do more of the physical activities. And the females and the biological women, they are developed to care on their offsprings and to have the key role in the intergenerational roots to the people. So in terms of the fertility, so we need to have the both heterosexual. To have heterosexual people, I mean the biological males and biological females who can do the reproductive actions and the procedure. But still, some of the gender, I mean some of the biological sex, were divided and assigned to the specific role. So they say the biology is a destiny. And evolutionary psychologists and the people, they would say that the men are more aggressive because of the hormone named the testosterone, and increase the many of the aggression, which is more fitted to the physical activities and the more competition, who do the hunting and more. And they are maintained because these are rooted in biology, which means these are the natural instinct and very natural. So it's very hard to resist to the biological instinct. So this might be some kind of the argument, which are more inclined or more balanced, more having more proportion to the biological aspects. But there are many criticisms because it's a kind of the way of the justifying the current gender inequality. It means that if the males, it may sound like the males were more fitted to more competitive or more important jobs sometimes. So it does not mean in that way. So it should not mean in that way, because as we learned, as you could read in the studies of the Davis and Moore and other the certification of those things. So the the meaning of the important roles, these are very this is very context specific, and sometimes in the timeline and the social context, these are very different from each other. So no single job can be ultimately more important than the other. And they say the difference between the childhood and even to the socialization in family and the peer group and the friends. So if they were living in very isolated area and without any interaction to each other, there might be some more reasonable because they are doing in that way. But the differences are so we cannot exclude the impact of the socialization. So the biology, so if we just focus on biology, these are very limited. And gender roles from various cultures. So based on the culture and the society, they all have very different gender role types. I mean, how about their roles or the gender role or locations in the domestic work? I mean, domestic labor. Some cultures, so in general, some culture has the better involvement of the males in domestic labor, but in some more traditional gender division of the domestic labor, the males are less likely to be involved in gender. So males are less likely to be involved in the domestic work and the child care and any of the care works. Then this is not a biological instinct because the biological characteristic and the biological baseline, the bases are not different. It doesn't need to be very different from their culture, because in biology, we share almost everything. So as we learned in the race part, the chapter of the race, only less than 1% of the DNA. These are contributing the differences of the appearance and the skin color and their height and weight, right? So only single proportion of the differences are contributing our appearances. And those culture, even those kind of culture, these are not impacted by biological traits, because do we have some kind of the biological characteristic forcing us to live in the United States? Not really. It's very hard because the evolutionary process, it takes millions of the years. So it's very hard to make the justification that those gender roles are a single and simply based on the DNA and the hormonal differences. So variations in the gender role and the various perspective, the masculinity and the femininity, these are usually based on the socialization, not only the biological traits. So that's why the more inclined perspective in single in biology, they are argued, they are criticized a lot based on their perspectives. Okay, so I wanted to ask this question. To the class, that whether should a transgender woman or a transgender or not only transgender but intersex women, should they be allowed to be in the professional sports or competition? For example, so maybe both the transgender people they were born as male, but if they identify they are female, for example, and can they join the competition in the female only or women's sports? Yeah, when I asked this question to the previous semester, the answer was half and half. So partly and then maybe partially, we should respect their gender identity, because they were not born in that way, but they just want to fulfill their capacity and their desire to be their own gender. They want to they want to be, then why should we ban on them to be into their fulfillment process? But in another hand, so as we saw in the video about the female sports player, if they are competing together, if some they are competing together to get the scholarship and the admission, or to join the championship all together as a professional competition, there would be still the biological differences between the males and females, because in some aspects of the sports activities, like running and many of the core activities, it's very hard to deny that there are the physical power differences and the physical differences between the biological males and biological females. So this is very controversial issue, we can see. So okay, so let me stop the first video so that we can have the to keep the better voice condition. Okay, thank you very much for your attention, and see you in the next video.